All right, I have the chat open too, but obviously, I was just saying that this is very informal. So feel free to unmute yourselves at any point and just like ask a question or add information to what we're talking about. I feel like the last time people were so good about like answering questions, utilizing the chat, unmuting themselves, and just made for a really nice discussion. So please feel free to do that again because we're all here to support each other. All right, let me share my screen. Tell me, I feel like last time when I started this, you guys could not see me flip slides, but did it change slides and go to a disclaimer this time?
Also,
yes.
I think it was because I didn't share my full screen last time. Okay. Quick disclaimer is that this is just for educational purposes only. I'll get into my introduction. I am a nurse. I'm also a lactation consultant. I'm also a mom to 3 daughters, and I'm also training for this marathon. But really, this is for educational purposes only. So the information that I'm providing to you all today really isn't meant to take the place of any, especially medical advice from your healthcare provider or your child's healthcare provider. In terms of me, so my name's Jamie O'Day. I'm a registered nurse. I'm a board certified lactation consultant. I have 3 daughters. They're 9, 7, and 5. They actually all had their first day of school today. My youngest today is her first day of kindergarten. And I'm one of the co-founders of NAPS. So NAPS stands for Newborn and Parenting Support. And through this company and through being a partner with the Every Women's Marathon and Team Milk, we really saw a need to support women, especially mothers. I mean, I'm doing this every day through my business, but really in the marathon and marathon training, because balancing life as a mom is just really hard. But balancing it while also, training for a marathon and taking care of kids and young kids can be really challenging as well. What I do through my business is we actually support women and families from pregnancy through early childhood. So really once kids sort of go off to preschool. So basically like pregnancy through age 3, 4, through a series of services. So prenatal classes, support groups, sleep consultations. Mary, I'm thinking about you when I'm thinking about the sleep situation. That's definitely something that I can help with, that we can help with. And all of those little milestones, right? From, lactation support and breastfeeding to pumping and going back to work or introducing bolos to starting solids and picky eating and 1-year-old transitions and potty training. We really have support services through that entire breadth of parenting. And we do it through our team of registered nurses and nurse practitioners. So everybody on our team is a registered nurse or nurse practitioner. And really the reason why, we're supporting families through this whole spectrum is because healthcare in general is really fragmented, and it's no different for maternal child healthcare, but there's no reason why nurses and nurse practitioners actually can't support you from pregnancy through these early childhood years. So we're trying to have it be a one-stop shop where we're providing you that education, support, and care all in one place from trusted healthcare providers. So that's a little bit about us. But today we're talking about, this is workshop number 2 of a 3-part series. So the first workshop that we ran, and I was just telling some of the other people on the call that I'll send out the recording for the first workshop as well, just so you can have it. But the first workshop we ran was on boundaries and communication to help with just scheduling your marathon training, right? But like also boundaries and communication for life. It can be really applied to anything. And sort of the same concept for today. But instead we're talking about outsourcing, asking for help in outsourcing to help get you to the finish line, right? But also just for life as a mom, as a parent in general. So today we're going to talk about sort of identifying what all the tasks are that you're doing, how those tasks are actually executed, identifying what tasks you can or want to get rid of, how you can communicate in a healthy way, sort of getting rid of those tasks, and then taking the time to actually like revisit responsibilities. So I'm going to come out of the shared screen in a second. Like the question that I want to pose to you to start this, right? And I'm sure there's going to be many overlapping themes here, but like, what do you do as a parent, as a mom, on a daily, weekly, quarterly, and annual basis? Like what comes to mind when I say like, what do you do? Throw things out there for me, you guys. Unmute yourselves, throw it in the chat. What do you got? I can
Plan
list
kid
about,
activities, like
say that
toddler
again?
plan the things you're going to sign your kids up for and
Yep.
schedule those.
Extracurriculars. What
Thank you
else?
for the word.
I
What'd
feel
you
like
say?
planning meals for the
Meal
family.
prep. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So what goes into meal prep, right? Thinking about what you want to actually have for meal. Oh gosh, my emojis are back. Thinking about what you actually want for meals, grocery shopping, actually cooking the meal, right? Like there's a lot involved in meal prep. What else? Come on. I know there's more. I know there's plenty of things that you all are doing. What else you
Laundry.
got? Laundry, big one. What else?
Just like general programming for everybody, like
Yeah.
vacation planning,
Yes.
sports planning, all that kind of
Sports
stuff.
planning. Appointments, I feel like goes into planning too, Claire, right? Like your
doctor's appointments.
yes, doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, like God forbid you need to see a specialist, those appointments, right? Driving, yeah. Driving to and from all these activities. Yes, that's such a good one. What else? We're going to come back to these, but I want to know where everybody's head is at today. Like even I laid out my kids' clothes, right? For the first day of school, packed their lunches, brushed their hair, made sure they brushed their teeth, right? Made sure they wore the right shoes to school today, and then actually walked them to school, who has a pet? Pet care,
Yes.
right? Walking the dog, feeding the dog, taking the dog to their appointments, right? Then you think about like, I mean, I could go on and on and on, right? The annual things like your taxes, holiday cards, there's all the dishes, general cleaning of the house. Oh gosh, that was not a thumbs up. There's no thumbs up for dishes. Okay. All right. Anything else that are big that people feel like we're missing? There's plenty, but no, feeling good about that? Okay. All right. So oh, hang on. I need to go back into my
Another thing I'd add is just like organizing childcare if your kids aren't in school age.
I think that's organizing childcare. You're right. And also like, even when they are in school, signing them up for school, filling out all the forms that are involved with school or these extracurricular activities or camps. I think that's such a good point. Yeah, I think that's another one. That's a huge burden, right? Okay. We're going to come back to these, right? So I want you to remember the things that we said and we'll come back to them, okay? So there's this book. Has anybody heard of the book Fair Play by Eve Rodsky? Anyone?
I was actually just talking to my coworker about this book.
Okay, and tell me about the conversation that you guys had.
The idea, she's doing it right now with her husband, and
Okay.
she was just talking
like she's
about,
actually doing the game.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, and she was talking about how mentally stressed he is now that he has to like take on the mental responsibility of some of these items.
Yeah. So this is just a quick like summary here, but it offers a practical framework for couples to achieve a more equitable division of household responsibilities. And there are a few like key takeaways for her, but basically, and the key takeaways are on this slide, but basically she's trying to gamify, and this is what you were just saying. There's actually like a game that goes along with it. There are these cards. But she's trying to gamify the responsibilities of these like everyday tasks. Now, this is just like one framework for thinking about it, right? So I do want to talk about this framework, and then we can talk about in the context of like how to utilize it in other ways. But basically, like her key takeaways are like identifying clear roles for these tasks, having open and honest communication, and really thinking about equity over equality, right? So like that each person in the household feeling like that what they're responsible for is like fair and they're doing it well, right, over like this equality piece. Okay. So when we think about, right, these ongoing tasks that we were just talking about, right, like you guys, I actually think we hit on almost all of these, right? So like the daily tasks, we're talking about the meal prep, the drop-offs and pickups. Actually, we didn't talk about that. We talked about general childcare, but drop-off and pickups is a big one too, right? And if you're not doing it, then like organizing that. Extracurriculars, we talked about pet care, dishes, daily hygiene, right? Like for yourself, for your kids. That's the brushing the teeth, that's the hair, right? Like that's a lot. Weekly, you're talking about the laundry, the grocery shopping, maybe like the general house cleaning, maybe meal prep falls into more of like a weekly category for you. Quarterly is where I put up like the health appointments, the activity signups, right? Wardrobe turnover, that was one we didn't hit on, but like, right, that's a big one to take on. And then annually, we're talking about like, yeah, the childcare school signups, the forms, the health appointments, holiday planning. Claire, you were talking about like the vacation scheduling and things like that. That's a big one. If you do any holiday cards, taxes, right? So these are all things that we touched on. So when we're thinking about these examples of ongoing tasks in the context of this book, Fair Play, the way that Eve breaks down each of these tasks is into 3 steps. And those 3 steps are what she calls CPE. So the C stands for conception. So that's step 1. Step 2 is the planning, and step 3 is the execution. And so when we're looking at the conception, this is the initial stage, right? Like this is where the idea or the task is conceived. So it involves identifying a need or recognizing that something has to be done. So I'm going to use the example of grocery shopping, right? So like the conception, right, stage of you know, how we're breaking down this task is like, okay, we need groceries, right? And identifying that like that is actually a need, okay? Step 2 in the planning, this involves like figuring out like the specifics and includes anticipating obstacles or determining like how to overcome them, right? So this is like okay, so conception is we need to go grocery shopping. Like we're low on groceries, or the kids are starting school, or what, I'm going back to work, whatever, right? The planning piece is like, okay, what do we need for each meal, right? I'm gonna make you know, shrimp scampi on Tuesday and chili on Wednesday, and we'll order out on Thursday, and on Friday we need frozen pizzas to cook, right? So like that's just figuring out those meals. Then it's like, okay, the kids are starting school, or you know, you're transitioning back to work. These are the things that I need for breakfast and lunch, right? I mean, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here in terms of like this planning piece. But these are like the logistics. And then it's like, okay, what obstacles could I encounter? Well, do I have the time to go to the grocery store and do this, right? And if I don't, then is this maybe something that we're outsourcing to a meal delivery service, right? Maybe using Instacart or Amazon Fresh or whatever. Or maybe the obstacle would be like you need, you know, you want specific meat for one of the dishes that you're cooking. And so you need to go to the butcher instead of the regular grocery store, right? And so it's all that planning, right? Around creating the list, what you need. Maybe the obstacle is, if anybody can relate to this, like you did the conception, you did the planning, you wrote out the list, you gave the list to your spouse, and like they actually, like one of the obstacles is like they're not going to get like exactly what I need from this list, right? I always think about the breakup with like I need 12 lemons, and Vince Vaughn comes home with the 3 lemons, and Jennifer Aniston's like, it's a 12 lemon centerpiece, I need 12 lemons. But anyway, so just thinking about like what are some of those obstacles and how maybe can you overcome them, right? Now, the execution of the grocery shopping, right, of needing to go grocery shopping and meal prep, right? If we're just talking about grocery shopping, maybe it's like the execution of like the actual grocery shopping, but I would take that one step further, and that it's the actual preparation of the meal, right? Because what you're actually doing is planning out all of these meals. And so the execution is the final step where the task is actually like carried out, right? So when we're looking at this breakdown of the steps to complete a task, right? Which steps do you feel like are the mental and emotional labor, like the invisible labor, and which one do you feel like is like the outward, like visible labor that people usually get credit for? What do you guys think?
Execution.
Execution is which piece?
The piece they get credit for.
The piece they get credit for. Yep. 1 and 2 are the mental issues for me. Exactly, Caroline. Yep. Exactly. So you guys are exactly right, right? So I think about this in the context of cooking. Like, let's think about it in the context of cooking, right? You might have done all of the conception around like, okay, we need to go grocery shopping. These are the meals that I'm going to cook this week. Here are I looked up all the, I mean, I literally have a cookbook sitting right next to me, right? Like, here are all the recipes that I'm looking up. Here are all the ingredients that I need, right? here's the whole list. You actually do the grocery shopping, right? And then you bring all those things home and maybe have another family over for dinner. And then your husband cooks the meal, let's say, right? Who gets credit? Your husband, right? Because he cooked the meal and that's what people see, right? I think about this in the context of like getting kids ready for school, right? My business partner, Emily, like plenty of times is the person who's like, conceptualizing and planning it, right? She packed the lunches, she packed the bags, she got the kids dressed, she made sure they brushed their teeth and their hair, got their shoes on, like basically did everything until they walked to the door to leave. And then her husband walks them to school, right? And it's like, oh, it's so nice that your husband brings the kids to school. And it's like, well, yeah, that's the easy part sometimes, right? So the reason why Eve breaks down the steps in this way is because she's really trying to point out the emotional and mental labor that goes into the execution of the task when what you see is only ever the execution. And that the majority of, like statistically speaking, women are actually responsible most often for step 1 and step 2, the conception and the planning, and they might actually be responsible for step 3, or their male counterpart is responsible for step 3, right? And so what she's trying to bring light to in talking about it in this way is that there is a huge mental and invisible labor and load that goes into planning every single task, right? From laundry to meal prep to scheduling appointments to school signups to coordinating childcare, right? And so her argument in her book is that what you can do is you take these tasks. So she breaks down, I'm just going to come out of the shared screen for a second so we can chat. So she breaks down these tasks into, I believe it's 5 different categories. And there's like 20 to 25 items in each of these categories. So it's like inside the home, outside the home, magic. Like one of the things that she talks about is like the tooth fairy and Santa Claus, right? Like somebody has to manage those things happening for your kids. And each of these tasks, so she's broken down all of these tasks into a cards. These cards, this is where the gamification of it comes into play. And those cards, basically you can sit down with your spouse and you guys decide on who gets what cards. And so it's, and then whatever card you take, so let's say we go back to the grocery shopping, whatever card you take, then you're responsible for the CPE. You're responsible for the conception, planning, and execution of it, right? So it's really trying to, again, bring that equality to, or equity to the division of these tasks. Does this make sense? Okay. So when we're in this gamification process, and this is where, like, this is one way to look at it. Some people are still okay with like dividing it up where you don't have to completely give up like the C and the P. Maybe you still do the conception and the planning, but the execution of it is actually, maybe something that you take on. And maybe it's more of just like, this opens up the opportunity for you to have more of a discussion with your spouse around the invisible labor. But basically, once you sit down and you start handing out these cards, right, and talking through like what it takes to actually like own that thing, what tends to happen in couples is there's usually tasks that one person in that couple doesn't mind doing, and the other, and then there are going to be some tasks that I hate doing, but the other person actually usually doesn't mind doing it, right? So what you'll actually find is like, I would be somebody who'd be like, I actually just hate the dishes. Like I really enjoy cooking, but I hate the dishes, right? And my husband would be like, actually, I don't really care about doing the dishes, right? So like, I'll take on the CPE of the dishes and you can take on the CPE of meal prep, right? Or whatever, dinners. And so then there's sort of this like division of tasks. Then what ends up happening, right, is there's some tasks that are going to be left over that nobody really wants to do, right? And then you get to decide how you want to handle that. Is it something where you just like, divide it evenly between the two of you? Or is this something where you talk about maybe outsourcing it, right? And so this is where the outsourcing piece comes into play. And so things that I think about as it relates, outsourcing can be used to either help your CPE, right? Or maybe outsourcing is something where like you actually bring somebody in and take over a task that neither you or your husband want to, you or your partner want to do, or however you're utilizing this, right? And so I think about this in the context of let's use laundry as the example. All right. So like laundry isn't an issue in my house, right? Because like I take care of my own laundry, my husband takes care of his own laundry, and we have outsourced my kids' laundry to our nanny, right? So actually like that's not something like where we decided, like my husband and I decided collectively together that like that's just something that we'll have be as part of like the roles and responsibilities of our nanny, right? There are people who utilize their nanny to help with some of the meal prep, right? So maybe you're just responsible for like, you know, creating the grocery list, maybe even ordering it and having it delivered to your house. And then maybe you have a nanny there who's collecting the groceries and doing some of the meal prep for you, right? And then maybe you come back in for the execution. So this is where the outsourcing piece I think can be really helpful. Other places that I feel like people outsource might be related to pet care, right? Like maybe you do hire a dog walker. I mean, childcare is something that you're outsourcing too, right? And so, you know, who's managing the outsourcing of that? When I talk about outsourcing, are there things that come to mind for people that you feel like are things that you're already outsourcing, or maybe like you don't actually like doing and you want to outsource? Is there anything that comes to mind for anyone?
Cleaning a house, maybe?
House cleaning, that's a great one. What else?
I follow like a Substack essentially on like meal planning for the week. So it like sends you what you're going to be making for that week via email. And I feel like that's kind of replacing some of the conceptualizing, because it's like, okay, it's telling me essentially what to do and what the recipe list is.
Okay, love that. What else? Does anybody have help with the pets? Childcare help, Caroline said. It's a good one. Like things that I think about when I think about outsourcing, right, are, oh gosh, you guys, I'm gonna get a lot of thumbs up today, I think, are like meal prep stuff. So I utilize Instacart. Like I have Instacart deliver my groceries every week. There's still like some conception and planning there, right, related to like what I'm gonna make for the kids' lunches or dinners, but like the actual like grocery shopping, right, I feel like is being taken care of. Like I said, my nanny helps out with the laundry for my kids, so that's a big one. I have somebody help out with the dog a few days a week. I just I mean, I use my nanny for a lot of things. The turnover of the clothes, like my nanny does all the turnover of the clothes, right? I think the other thing to remember, and Caroline said this, is like currently you're outsourcing the house cleaning, right? There's also some things that you guys can do where maybe you're actually just, and this is what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about the you know, how to ask for help or outsource during marathon training, right? Is like maybe this is actually just a period of time that you're utilizing this type of help, right? I talk to parents about this a lot those first few weeks or months when you bring a baby home. Like Mary, you're in the middle of this right now, right? Where you have a 3-month-old, like maybe like you are actually outsourcing like the meal prep. Maybe you're utilizing a meal delivery service like Feast and Fettle, or you know, one of the other million meal delivery services there are during this period of time when like your physical and mental capacity to meal prep just isn't there because you have a baby, or maybe you have a sick parent, right? Or maybe you are trying to create time in an already busy day to find time to actually train for the marathon. And in order to do that, you just need to outsource these things for a period of time. So that could be related to meal prep, that could be related to house cleaning, that could be related to having somebody help you with the kids, or with the dog. And just because you're doing it for this short period of time doesn't mean that you have to continue doing it, right? Now, there are plenty of people who start doing it and they're like, this is great that I don't have to do this anymore. And they continue doing it, right? But again, just thinking about it in the context of like, just because you're doing it right now doesn't mean you have to continue doing it forever, okay? So when we're thinking about how to actually talk, you know, how do we actually start outsourcing some of these things, right? And asking for help. One of the things that's really helpful in being able to determine, you know, what it is in terms of tasks that you want to be getting rid of, and or like when you determine that, how to actually ask for it, is really rooted in good communication, right? And healthy communication. And I am not going to sit here and claim to be like necessarily a communication expert, but I've learned a lot over the years with just teaching parents this and being a parent myself, and thinking through some of these ideas. So when we're thinking about tasks, right? Let's go back to the tasks for a minute. I would actually start with thinking about tasks that you actually just hate doing, right? So maybe you're not buying the Fair Play book, maybe you're not getting the cards, maybe you're not sitting down with your spouse at the dinner table and passing out these cards, right? But if you just thought about one task that you truly hate doing and you don't want to do anymore, or one task that maybe right now in this stage of life, or with whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, maybe it is like the training for the marathon, right? Just really isn't serving you right now. Like it really is getting in the way. Just start with that one thing, right? And then the question is, how do you actually offload that, right? Is this something that you're asking your spouse to take on? And if so, let me give you, the communication for how to do that. Is this something that you're going to pay to have outsourced, right? Is this something where you're going to pay for the dog walker or pay for the meal delivery service? And so that's one side of the tasks, right? Another piece of the task is like, if you really care, about how a certain task is done, even if maybe you don't love doing it, but you really care about the way that it's done, are you actually capable of letting that go? So the example that I like to use, and I want you all to be honest with me, is the reloading of the dishwasher. Do we have any reloaders of the dishwasher on this call, or anybody who's married to a dishwasher reloader? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? You load the dishwasher, your partner loads the dishwasher, and then you reload it. What do we got? Married to one. Okay, right? All right. So Caroline, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second if you want to unmute yourself. You're married to a dishwasher reloader. So do you even bother to load the dishwasher? And if you do, your husband just reloads it, or is that just a task that he has like decided he's fully going to take on?
So it's funny. This was one of the first questions that you asked at pre-baby boot camp.
I know. This slide is actually from pre-baby boot camp, Caroline.
And it was something we talked about after pre-baby boot camp. I was like, just leave the dishwasher. I do not load the dishwasher much anymore. We have an au pair who lives with us, and the dishwasher has been part of her task. It was her first time using a dishwasher. Not very common in Brazil to have dishwashers.
Okay.
So this is like a big struggle for her to get over loading the dishwasher in the right way. And after like weeks of training on it, my husband still reloads the dishwasher after she does it.
Okay.
I mostly stay out of that now. And if he thinks that the cups need to be lined up in a certain way and the top parts of the sippy cups need to go there, then he will do it.
Okay. So this has been an evolution, the reloading of the dishwasher for you guys.
His reloading has stayed the same. It's more just turned from me being the initial loader and him redoing it to now someone else being the initial loader and him still doing it.
I love that. Thank you for sharing, Caroline. Is there anybody on this call who refolds laundry? I feel like this is another common offender. Or anybody who's married to somebody who refolds laundry? It's like you do it one way.
Yes, because I put everything in the kids' drawers in outfits. So I have to go through and like resort it and fold it.
Okay.
In my mind.
So this is actually a really good example for what we're going to talk about next. So I'm probably going to come back to you here, Mary. But you put it together by outfits. So I'm making the assumption then that you're responsible for dressing the kids most mornings.
Yes. Yeah.
Does your partner ever dress the kids?
No, he's on a shift, so he usually is out of the house before we're up. Okay,
great. So this is I'm going to come back to this, Mary. This is such a good example, and this is usually the story that I tell related to like either refolding laundry or getting the kids dressed. Okay, So this is great. So my point here, right, around like these tasks, and if you want it done a specific way, like one is like, if there's something that you really hate doing and you just want to get rid of it and you don't give a shit around how it's done, like get rid of that task, right? Figure out how to get rid of it. We'll talk about effective communication in just a second. But if you want to get rid of a task that you're like really particular about, then I usually have you like turn that mirror back around on yourself, right? And ask yourself, like, is this actually something that you really are capable of getting rid of? Meaning, like, if somebody does it differently than you do it, right? Like folding the laundry or getting your kids dressed or loading the dishwasher, can you actually let it go and let them do it however they want to do it, knowing that the task is going to get done? It's just going to look different than the way you did it, right? So this is where this question, so there's another great book. It's called How to Not Hate Your Husband After Having Kids. She really should have named it something different. Has anybody heard of this book? I think it's How Not to Hate Your Husband After Having Kids. Anybody? Guys, if not, it's a very, very, very funny read. But basically, quick and dirty version of this book is it's this woman, like this actual woman, Johnsey, who wrote the book. Her and her husband, they have one 6-year-old daughter. Basically, they're at like a little bit of a crossroads in their marriage where they can either continue down the path that they're on of like feeling a little bit like resentful towards each other, and it'll likely end in divorce, or like they can try and actively, oh, I did share this on the first webinar. I didn't realize that, Kelly. Great. Or they can actively do something about, about their marriage and try and make it a little bit better. So she's a freelance writer. This is how she writes the book. And her and her husband actually went through this. She's a freelance writer. Her husband's a freelance writer. And she was basically like, hey, if I go through this journey of like finding different ways for you and I, for our marriage to be a little bit better after having kids, will you come along on this path with me? And he was like, yeah, sure. So basically she interviewed a bunch of these, different experts and people. Like she talked to this like world-renowned marriage counselor. She talked to Brené Brown. She talked to a sex therapist. She had a home organizer come in. She talked to the head of FBI negotiations. That was like one of my favorite interviews in this book. Anyway, I could talk about this book for the next 30 minutes. I'm not going to do that. Instead, one of the things that came up in this book, right, that was really like an aha moment for me, and now I utilize a lot in when I talk about outsourcing, asking for help, communication, right, is this question of what is it costing me? So this is what's at the top of the flow chart over here on the right-hand side of your screen. And basically what this means, right, is the thing that you're feeling frustrated by, the thing that maybe is making you feel like, the person in your life feels like they're ungrateful, or you're angry or sad or whatever, right? That thing that maybe you actually want to address with your partner, right? The question here that you want to ask yourself around like, is this something that I'm going to address, is what is it costing me, right? So when you ask yourself this question, it only goes one of two ways, right? It's either not costing you anything or it's costing you something that benefits you, okay? I'm going to give you an example of this. So coming back to like getting your kids dressed. So my husband gets up with the kids every morning, has for several years, right? And there was a period of time before I read this book and I came across this question of what is it costing me, where he would get up with the kids in the morning, get them up, get them dressed, usually takes them out to grab a coffee or whatever, and then I would sleep for another hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, right? Like Mary's probably sitting there like, this would be delightful since you have a 3-month-old and lack of sleep. And then I would wake up, and more often than not, what would happen is I would go into the family room, and at the time we had 2 kids, and my 2 kids would be dressed, and they would be in like clothes that don't fit them. Either they were too big or too small. They didn't match, like seasonally inappropriate, right? And my initial reaction that I said out loud would be like, the first thing that I would say would not be like, thanks for letting me sleep in, like, good morning. It would be like, what are the kids wearing, right? And I did this a lot, again, more often than not. And so my husband obviously could have been like, cool, then if you care so much, you can get up with the kids and get them dressed, right? But this is an example of something where him getting up with the kids and getting them dressed, and then me commenting on how he dressed them, could have actually cost me something that benefited me, right? So me saying that, he could have been like, okay, if you care so much about what they wear, then you can get up and get them dressed, which means I'm getting up an hour or 2 earlier than I want. And in that scenario, actually, I still to this day, care more about sleep than what my kids were wearing, right? And so what I realized was I actually like, one, it's costing me something that could benefit me. Two, I actually don't really give a shit what my kids wear. Like, I don't care that it doesn't match. I don't care that it's not the right size. I don't care that it's like seasonally inappropriate. I don't care that if it is too small or too big, that maybe they ask me to like change their clothes later in the day. Like I didn't care, right? Sleep is more important in that scenario. So sometimes this idea of like, what isn't costing me? And for the record, you guys, I actually ask myself this question often with my kids of like, you know, what my kid asking me to do this thing or whatever, like, is it actually costing me? Like, why am I saying no a little bit? Right. So this is something that I've used like with my kids and even just, you know, in life at work and things like that. So in that scenario, you're not going to say anything, right? Like, so this is the example of like, if you're the person who I'm going to use the example of refolding the laundry, Mary, although you would make the argument that it is costing you something, right? But if you were refolding the laundry, you know, just to refold it, so that it fit in the drawers better, right? Or that maybe the outfits matched up, but your husband was the one who got them dressed every morning, and what you realize is that like it actually didn't really matter to you like what they were wearing, like maybe you wouldn't say anything, right? On the flip side, this does feel like it's costing you something, right? Where like somebody else folds the laundry, you're responsible for getting the kids dressed every day, right? So like actually not having the laundry folded in a way where it's easy for you to access like whatever it is, the outfits that you need, that is costing you something. It's costing you time. That's probably costing you like some mental energy, right? It probably feels a little bit frustrating. Like that is worth addressing it. Now, in this scenario, Mary, I would say like you probably have like two options there, right? One is whoever's folding the laundry instead of you, maybe can you ask them to do it a certain way so that it does make your life a little bit easier, and we can talk about what that would look like. Or, and this is going back to the dishwasher and what I was talking to Caroline about, is it actually like folding the laundry is actually just your task, right? Because you do want it done a certain way. The other person like isn't capable of doing it that way, right? Like loading the dishwasher, like you do want it done a certain way. The other person isn't capable of doing it, and so that is actually just something that you're going to do, right? Or maybe it's that you decide that you are going to refold it or reload the dishwasher, right? But if you're deciding that like this thing, right? And it doesn't have to be a task, it can be anything. Like this framework can be utilized for anything. So another example that I use is like maybe you have you know, the mother-in-law who doesn't abide by like any of the schedules that you have for your kids, right? So like anytime that your mother-in-law watches the kids, you come home and there is at least like a kid who is tired and or hungry, right? And so like it doesn't feel like it's worth you leaving because you're coming home to this like hungry or tired kid who's miserable, and then your mother-in-law leaves and you're just like stuck with this miserable kid for the rest of the day, right? Like that is actually costing you something. And so the conversation with your mother-in-law is worth it, right? Just like maybe the conversation around getting, you know, how they're folding the laundry is worth it, right? And so when you're deciding to have the conversation, there are actually a few things that we know through research are really helpful when it comes to effective communication. And so the first thing here is using an I statement, right? Now, how many of us have gotten to an argument and the first thing that we do is like, you didn't fold the laundry right, right? Like it's not an I statement. Like I do, I mean, this is an I statement, but you do nothing and I do everything, right? So when we talk in that way, and I think we touched on this last time, like what's the person's response to that when instead of using an I statement, you say you do nothing, I do everything. You don't know how to fold the laundry. What do you feel like people's response to that is usually? Give you a hint. It's not a good one. How do you feel like that person usually feels when you're using a you statement? Who said that?
Mary, you go on defense.
Attacked. You go on defense, right? So typically the response that you get is defensiveness. When you feel like somebody's attacking you or you feel like you need to defend yourself, right? It's more of a fight or flight response. And so what you're, and you know, typically in relationships, it tends to be a fight. And so that person is no longer listening to what it is that you have to say, right? They're really just thinking about what the next thing that they're going to say back to you is, right? So no, there's not going to be good, healthy communication there. If you use an I statement, right, then you're saying, you know, an I statement, expressing how you're feeling, using a feeling word, offering up a solution, how that solution would make you feel, and then asking them if they're capable of doing that, right? So I'm going to use an example again from my own life. So there was a point in time after my husband and I had our second kid, I felt like I was doing a lot, right? Like I was putting the kids to bed, I'm the cook in my house, I was making dinner. And so what was happening was like, I was making dinner, I was doing like bath and bedtime, although my husband helped out with bedtime, but like bath and bedtime. And then I would come out from bedtime and there would be dishes in the sink, right? And I'm sure you guys can all envision this happening. And so with the dishes in the sink, and then what I would do, I would go over to the sink and I would start like huffing and puffing and throwing the dishes in the dishwasher, right? And my husband would naturally be like, what's wrong? And, one of two responses, right? Like, nothing. What do you mean? Right? Or like, the typical response, like, you do nothing and I do everything. Like, I am doing everything, right? These like really big general statements. And if I said to him like, nothing, what do you mean? Right? Typically what that then results in is like me making up, so this is point 2, like me making up these stories in my head, right? Like I'd be loading the dishwasher after telling my husband there's nothing wrong. And like in my head, I would be like, he doesn't appreciate me. Why doesn't he see that like I'm frustrated and I just want him to do the fucking dishes? And so there was like, I made up this whole story, right? And this story usually ended in like my husband and I getting a divorce, right? He must not appreciate me, right? This whole thing. So then this turned into, okay, like being really clear in what it is. And I think this is sometimes where women struggle, is being really clear in what the thing is that they actually want or need, right? So being like, I do everything, right? Or I need help, right? Are might be relatively true statements, but that isn't really specific in terms of like, what about everything that you're doing do you not want to do, right? Or what specifically do you want help with? And the more specific and direct you can be, the better. Because if you say, and maybe this has happened to some of you, tell me if it has, I need help, your partner's going to help you, or whoever you're saying this to is going to help you in the way that they think is helpful, right? So maybe that ends up being that like they're, taking out the trash, while you have like 2 kids in the bath and dinner cooking, and what you actually need is for like them to wash the kids who are in the bath, right? So the more clear and direct you can be in what your ask is, the better, right? So first is try not to make up stories and be really clear and direct. So coming back to the story that I had with the dishes, what I really actually wanted was to not do the dishes, right? So then how I brought this up to my husband, right, which was different than before, which was I do everything, you do nothing, right? Like nothing's wrong, like whatever, you don't appreciate me, right? Is now actually, no, I want you to do the dishes, right? And so the I statement with the feeling words, with the solution and how it made me feel was, I feel really overwhelmed after bedtime on the nights that I've cooked and there's dishes in the sink. Do you think that on the nights that I could cook, on the nights that I cook, you could do the dishes? I honestly think like I'd be less overwhelmed. We would have more time to like spend together in the evening time. Is that something you feel like you could do? Truly, this is the conversation that I had with my husband. And he was like, yeah, sure, no problem. And truly from that point on, right? Like he did the dishes and has for the last 7 years, right? Now, from the first workshop, we learned that like this is a boundary in communication, right? Like I set the boundary that I need him to do the dishes, and oftentimes you have to reset that boundary. So that can feel a little bit frustrating, especially when you're talking about tasks. Like we talked about this task, like you're going to do it, right? When they don't do the dishes the one time that you cook, it's like, we talked about this, like you're doing the dishes, right? So sometimes you have to have that conversation again. But this was an example where like, for the most part, my husband did it every night from then on. But that's the difference between using I statements and expressing how you feel and how that solution will make you feel. Because when you're doing that to somebody who loves and cares about you, they're really likely to say yes, right? So when we're thinking about maybe tasks that we don't want to do anymore, or we want to outsource, thinking about it through, is this a task that I can actually like really don't want to do and can outsource? Or is this task costing me something or not, right? And then how can we actually ask for that in a way that's going to get us what it is that we really want? Okay. Any questions about this, just like communication framework, or any additional sort of comments to add?
I think that that's so helpful. I love how you took us through that. And so just want to say great. I think that's great advice.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I just wanted to point out a few like additional tips. Some of these we've talked about a little bit, and then we can just chat a little bit more for these last 10 minutes. But a few additional tips, and I know we talked about the guilt last time related to boundaries and communication, but really try and avoid guilt, right? Especially around like maybe one of the right? Like let's think about a task that if you gave up, it might make you feel a little bit guilty. Is there one that comes to mind? Like, is like maybe like daycare or school, like drop off or pick up, if you outsource that to somebody else? I feel like we actually talked about this a little bit last time around, like they're feeling a little bit of guilt around having somebody else do that. There was a person on the call who's talking about maybe their nanny doing it. But does anybody have a like maybe if you didn't cook, would that make you feel guilty? Is there something that comes to mind for someone? Outsourcing a task that might make you feel bad. Caring for the dog. All right, Mary. Good for you. I don't feel bad about outsourcing that. Maybe it's because we had a dog for a long time. He passed away, and then we got another dog when I didn't really want one. So I guess I don't really feel that bad about outsourcing it now. But yeah, this is such a good, okay. So caring for the dog, right? So with guilt only serves you a purpose if you're doing something wrong, right? You having somebody else take the dog for a walk, right? Or outsourcing that for this stage of life, Mary, right? Like you're in it right now. You have a 3-month-old, right? You having help with that isn't doing anything wrong, right? So just because you feel like you should do something or should do it all doesn't mean you actually have to. The other thing that I like to tell people around guilt, the question that I like to tell people to ask themselves around guilt is, would my male counterpart feel guilty about the same thing, right? So would your male counterpart feel guilty about not cooking or not doing drop off or not taking care of the dog? The answer is almost always no. It's a good filter to put it through. And so when you're thinking about these tasks, right, and outsourcing them maybe for somebody else to do, why is it that you feel like you should be doing it, right? Is it feel like your worth is wrapped up in that, which is, not true. And are you actually doing anything wrong, right? If you're not, then try and let that guilt go, right? We talked about temporary outsourcing either, and maybe this helps with the guilt, right? Maybe the piece is like, I do feel guilty about not caring for the dog right now. Like I do feel guilty about not taking care of the dog, right? I feel guilty about outsourcing that. But maybe you put it through the lens of like, I feel guilty about it, but I am just going to do it for the next, 3 months while I'm sort of like in the thick of it, right? And then the thing about guilt is, right, like the longer you do the thing that maybe you felt guilty about that you shouldn't have because you're not doing anything wrong, the less guilty you feel as time goes on. So then maybe that is something that you end up keeping around. Maybe not. Maybe that's just how you got there in the first place, right? But thinking about guilt just in the context of it only serves a purpose that you're doing something wrong. And maybe one way to combat that guilt is just like being like, this is actually just temporary while I'm training for this marathon, right? Maybe that also gives you context to initiate the conversation around people for like outsourcing some of this help, right? Again, using an I statement, I've noticed that while I've been training for the marathon, it's been really hard for me to keep up with the meal prep. Do you think that for the next 10 weeks, right? Let's pretend like we're talking to a spouse or maybe a nanny or something. Do you think that for the next 10 weeks, like you could actually take on the meal prep for dinner or for the kids' lunches or whatever, or all of it? And then after those 10 weeks, like after the marathon's over, like let's revisit how that's working. And maybe that's something that we keep or maybe that's something that I take back on, right? So it can also give you a framework for having some of these conversations around the task too. Also understanding, and I'm sure people have heard this before, know that it's a full sentence, right? We talked about this a lot in the last workshop around boundaries. So in order to preserve your time and energy, especially as it relates to preparing for this marathon, right? Like you do have to be able to say no to non-essential things or those tasks that you just don't even like doing anymore, right? Or really do consume a lot of your like physical and mental capacity, right? And you definitely don't have the time and energy to take on those tasks that you're not responsible for. So if you had this conversation around outsourcing tasks and you have people who are taking on other things for you right now, and they maybe ask you to take it back, right? the answer is no, right? And maybe you talk through how you can, maybe there's somebody else who can take it on, how you can make it work, but that doesn't mean that you just actually like take on responsibilities that aren't yours or things that aren't essential, right? And then this brings me to my last point, which is like identifying your people. So understanding that you have like, we talked a lot about the division of tasks within your household with your spouse or partner, but you have other people in your life who can help you out with tasks too. So you're thinking about those family members or friends. You're thinking about this community, right? That Team Milk and the Every Women's Marathon has created for you all to support each other in this journey, that you turn to for sound advice and support. And you utilize those people either to help out with some of these tasks, right? And outsource them and ask for help. Or you utilize those people in those moments of guilt, in those moments of self-doubt, in those moments of judgment of like, can I really give this up? Like, I feel like a bad mom doing that. And those are your people who are going to be like, I hope I could be one of those people for you all, but those are going to be the people who are going to be like, hell no, like you gave this up. You're not like, there's no reason to feel guilty. Like, hold your ground, right? So those are the people that you really, really identify truly. I tell people to make a physical list, and turn to those people in those moments where, you're feeling a little bit uneasy, or maybe you really actually just need a little bit of extra help and you have those reliable people in your corner. Okay. All right, let me come out of the screen share. I know we have, what do we have? Like 5 minutes left here. How are people feeling? Thoughts, questions, concerns? I really just wanted to give you a framework for thinking about, in life in general, but especially these next few weeks as your training is ramping up, right? You're spending more time on your training and away from your family and work for those longer runs, right? To actually like have that time available to you without trying. I use the example of like trying to, cram 10 pounds of shit into a 5-pound bag. That's what I don't want you guys to do. I want you to be able to think about these tasks and how you can start outsourcing even these small things. Caroline, the book is Fair Play. It's Fair Play. It's by Eve Rodsky. There is also a documentary on this. There is a movie called Fair Play that is like a drama or a thriller or something. That is not it. There is a documentary though, I believe on Netflix, that walks you through like different couples and like this fair play concept if you wanted to utilize that. But yeah, the book is, it's awesome. And you can get the book and those cards that I told you about on Amazon. Like those cards are there as well. And then the other book that I told you about was How Not to Hate Your Husband After Kids. Okay. In thinking about these tasks, outsourcing, like where you might want to ask for help or outsource, when I ask you guys, like, there's one thing that you just really don't like doing that if you could outsource it, like right now today, does anybody have one thing that comes to mind for them? Mine's school lunches. I asked my nanny to make the lunches for my kids the day before for school the next day. That was new this year. That was a new outsourcing thing I'm doing this year. Does anybody have another one that comes to mind for them?
Yeah. And that's
probably cleaning. That would be nice to outsource.
The spot is just interesting. Like I just keep coming back to.
So cleaning, that's a great one, right? Like either, again, for this period of time, there are plenty of people who maybe hire a cleaning person or ask somebody else to do this, right? Oh, another thumbs up. Again, maybe it's just for this period, maybe it's only temporary, it's just for this stage of life or period of time, or maybe this is just something that you hate and you don't want to do anymore. And like the cost to have somebody do it for you outweighs like the cost it is to your physical and mental health, right? Anything else that comes to mind for people? It's okay if you don't have one, but I hope this got you thinking about tasks. And if you want to check out the list of tasks in Eve Rodsky's book, it's a great starting off point to just like think about all the things that you haven't even thought about, right? Like holiday cards, I feel like is such a good one. I do not do holiday cards. My husband does holiday cards because I said I don't want to do it and I don't care about it. And he was like, all right. And then, 3 weeks later, holiday cards showed up and he sent them out. I don't know who they go to. I don't know what picture is on the holiday cards. It is delightful, you guys. So if there is, if I can encourage you to think of one task today and have given you the framework to communicate what that task is that you want to offload, I hope at the very least that that's one thing that you guys have taken away from today. No problem. All right. Any other questions? Oh, you're welcome, Mary. Bye, Caroline. So great to see you all again. I will send out an email with the recording for this workshop. I'll send out the recording of the other workshop for you all. Claire, I'll get you the recording as well, so that you can get it up on the website. And if anybody has any questions, just let me know. You can reach me. You can just reach me through our website, which is just nurturebynaps.com. I'll put it in here for you guys. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me this afternoon. So great to see some of you again. I appreciate you all. Have a wonderful day. Bye, everybody.